Hey everyone, welcome to Sidetrack Adventures. My name is Steve. So I've always been interested in Billy the Kid, and as most people know, though not everyone believes, Billy the Kid was shot and killed by Sheriff Pat Garrett in 1881. Well, 27 years later, Pat Garrett himself was shot and killed here in Las Cruces, New Mexico. So right now I'm standing at the historical marker for the murder of Pat Garrett, but this isn't where he was actually killed. Despite Las Cruces being built up over the years, the spot where Pat Garrett was actually murdered is still in a remote part of the desert. So that's what we're going to try to do today. We're going to head out into the desert and see if we could find the actual spot where Pat Garrett was killed.
We are right next to Highway 70 right now. This was probably the closest they could get to the actual site that people could easily access. He is of course best known for killing Billy the Kid, but Pat Garrett's murder is its own crazy story. So let's head about a mile down the highway to start our journey into the desert and talk about how one of the most famous sheriffs of the Old West met their end. We just parked at a local high school, and the best instructions I found on getting to the spot where Pat Garrett was killed were basically just walk about a mile into the desert following the power lines. Hopefully we don't run into Heisenberg or Tuco out here. To give kind of a brief rundown on Pat Garrett's life, he was born in Alabama in 1850, the son of a plantation owner. The American Civil War destroyed the Garrett family's finances, and both his parents died before he was 18. By the mid-1870s, he was hunting buffalo in Texas. When the buffalo hunting dried up, Garrett moved to New Mexico where he worked as a bartender, then got a job as a cowboy working for Pete Maxwell. It was at Maxwell's house a few years later that Garrett would shoot and kill Billy the Kid. Garrett was elected sheriff of Lincoln County, New Mexico in November 1880 and began the hunt for Billy the Kid. He captured Billy that December, but the Kid famously escaped, killing 2 deputies in the process just 13 days after being sentenced to hang. The mountains in the distance really make for an incredible view. I know the camera always shrinks everything, but in person, they are massive. We are so close to the city right now, but this area probably doesn't look much different than it did in Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid's time, aside from the wires. It was on July 14th, 1881, that the event that Garrett is best known for happened. Garrett was tipped off to where Billy the Kid was, and arrived at Pete Maxwell's house around midnight. Billy walked into Maxwell's bedroom, where Garrett was standing in the shadows. The Kid didn't recognize the man standing in the dark, so he asked, "Quién es?" or "Who is it?" And Garrett replied by shooting him twice. Here's some old concrete. It's hard to tell if there was something here at one point, or if this was just dumped out here. So after killing Billy the Kid, in response to a number of stories that painted Garrett in a bad light, Garrett wrote a book about Billy the Kid, giving his side of the story. He didn't seek re-election as a sheriff, and briefly moved to Texas where he was a Texas Ranger for about a month, before moving back to New Mexico. Over the next couple of decades, he'd moved back and forth between New Mexico and Texas, and was involved in a number of business ventures, and even served as sheriff again. In 1901, President Theodore Roosevelt nominated Garrett to the post of Collector of Customs in El Paso. His post was not renewed in 1906. There's some sort of little fence and concrete block coming up, and it looks like there's something on top of the block. Let's get a closer look. It looks like there's a survey marker on top of the block. I'm not sure what the fence is for, but yeah, this is definitely a survey marker. I see 1989 on the block. Let me go to the other side so this isn't upside down for everyone. And of course my shadow's in the way here. And I'm pretty sure this is a 1989. It looks like a 9. I see something up ahead, so it looks like we've about made it to the spot. In the end, the man who killed Billy the Kid would be done in over a dispute involving goats, though there is some controversy as to who actually killed him. And this is definitely the right place, unless somebody put a plaque for something else out here in the middle of nowhere. So the Garretts signed a 5-year agreement to lease part of their ranch to a man named Jesse Wayne Brazel, unaware that Brazel planned to bring in goats, which is something cattlemen at the time strongly disliked. When Garrett found out, he tried to break the lease, but Brazel refused. Eventually, Brazel agreed to cancel the lease if a buyer could be found for his goats. Carl Adamson agreed to buy the goats, but then backed out when he found out there were 1,800 goats and not 1,200. To try and work things out, Adamson agreed to meet with Garrett and Brazel. On February 29, 1908, Garrett and Carl Adamson left towards Las Cruces on Adamson's wagon. Brazel appeared on horseback along the way. And this side road here is the actual road they were traveling on. Apparently, Garrett and Brazel argued about the goats, and Garrett told Brazel that he would get him and the goats off his land one way or another. Adamson stopped the wagon so he could relieve himself, and Garrett decided he would do the same. As the two men were peeing off the back of the wagon, with their backs turned towards Brazel, a shot rang out and Garrett fell to the ground. Then another shot was fired. The first bullet hit Garrett in the back of the head, and the second got him in the stomach while he was on the ground. He died instantly. Brazel handed the smoking gun to Adamson. Then they returned to Las Cruces, leaving the dead Garrett on the side of the road. Brazel turned himself in, claiming he shot Garrett in self-defense. Brazel's murder trial only lasted 1 day before he was acquitted. Adamson, who was the only other witness, was never even called to testify. The defense was the tried and true Old West standby, a preemptive strike in the face of mortal danger. He said Garrett had threatened him with a shotgun, and he shot in order to save his life. It's worth noting, Pat Garrett wasn't well liked around town, and the prosecution really didn't make much of an effort. It took the jury less than 30 minutes to acquit, and there was even a big barbecue after the trial. Minus the monument, this probably looks exactly the same as the last thing Pat Garrett ever saw. This monument has been built up over the years, so there are really 3 parts to it. The site was originally marked in 1908 by this stone with a cross on it. To protect the stone and keep it in place, the concrete was added in 1965, and you can see the inscription on that. And finally, this more elaborate monument and plaque was installed in 2021 by the Friends of Pat Garrett. It seems like he has more friends now than he did in 1908.
Now that we've made it out to the murder site, there's still one more place I want to check out while we're here in Las Cruces, and for that we have to head back to town to find the grave of Pat Garrett. We're now at the Masonic Cemetery, where Pat Garrett, along with his wife and a number of his children and descendants, are buried.
And here is the resting place for the Garretts, with Pat Garrett right in the middle. Over the years, there have been a number of theories put forth that Brazel didn't actually kill Garrett, but someone else did. The Garrett family themselves thought Adamson might have been the killer. There are a few other people often listed as possible killers, but I always think the simplest explanation is usually the right one. That the guy that was having a feud with Garrett, and admitted to killing him, was probably the killer. But if you want to go down that rabbit hole, if you search online, there are quite a few interesting theories. Immediately next to Pat Garrett's graves are the graves of his son Dudley Poe Garrett, his daughter Ida Garrett, who died at 15, his second wife, his son Patrick Floyd Garrett, and his daughter Anna Garrett.
So that's our look at the murder of Pat Garrett. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and we'll see you next week.